The stars stretched across the black sky like diamonds scattered on velvet cloth, and Laura Mitchell had seen them all her life, but never grew tired of their beauty, and she stood on the bridge of her ship, called Horizon Edge, watching a new planet come into view through the main screen, and this planet was different from all the others she had visited in her 15 years of traveling through space, because it glowed with a soft blue and green light that seemed almost magical. Laura was the captain of this exploration vessel, and her crew trusted her completely because she had guided them through many dangerous situations and always brought them home safely. And today they were approaching a world that their scanners had marked as 10 to 447, and the readings from this planet made no sense at all because they showed signs of advanced technology mixed with energy patterns that should not exist according to everything humans knew about. Science Commander Kate Turner sat at her station, running scan after scan, and her face showed confusion and excitement at the same time, and she kept shaking her head as new data came through. And finally she turned to Laura and said that the energy readings coming from the northern continent were unlike anything in their entire database, and Laura told her to keep monitoring while she made the decision that would change everything. Laura ordered the ship to descend into the atmosphere, even though protocol said they should observe from orbit first, and even though every regulation in the fleet handbook told her to wait for approval from Earth command. But something deep inside her knew that this planet held answers to questions humanity had not even thought to ask yet, and her crew followed her orders without hesitation, because that was the kind of loyalty she had earned over the years. The ship dropped through clouds that were purple and seemed to glow from within. Small particles of light drifted past the view screen like fireflies, and Laura had never seen clouds like these on any world. And as they broke through the lowest layer, the crew gasped at what appeared before them. A tower rose from the surface, reaching so high into the sky that its top disappeared into the clouds they had just passed through. And this tower was made of crystal, or something like crystal, that caught the light of the alien sun and split it into 1,000 rainbow colors. And the structure was so tall and so impossibly thin that it should have fallen over, but it stood perfectly straight, piercing the sky like a needle of frozen starlight standing. At the very top of this tower was a figure, and even from this distance Laura could see that it was female in shape, but definitely not human, and her skin seemed to glow with its own internal light. And her hair was silver and moved in the wind, but also seemed to move on its own, as if it were alive. And what struck Laura most were the ears that rose from the sides of her head, coming to elegant points that marked her as something from Earth legends and fairy tales. Behind this alien woman, something massive moved and coiled around the tower like a serpent, and Laura felt her breath catch in her throat as she realized what she was looking at. And it was a dragon, and not just any dragon, but a creature so magnificent that it made the legends pale in comparison. In its scales shifted colors, constantly moving from deep blue to burning orange to purple to gold, and when it spread its wings, the span blocked out the sun completely. Kate was frantically working her controls and calling out readings that made no sense, and she said the dragon was generating enough power to run an entire city, and the woman standing above them was registering on their scanners as both living tissue and something else entirely, and something they had no words for in human language. Laura opened a communication channel, even though she had no idea if this being could understand human speech, and she was about to speak when she felt something enter her mind. And it was not painful, but it was shocking, and she heard words that were not spoken aloud, but appeared directly in her thoughts. The alien woman had raised one elegant hand, and her voice filled Laura's mind, saying that humans had traveled very far from their home world, and that was impressive for such a young species. But they had entered a war that they could not possibly understand, and Laura wanted to ask what war and who was fighting, but before she could form the thought, the sky above them tore open. Ships emerged from rips in reality itself. And these were not ships like human vessels with smooth lines and logical designs, and instead, they were jagged and wrong and made from materials that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it, and they looked like someone had taken the concept of a ship and twisted it into something dark and terrible, and they immediately began firing weapons at the planet below. The dragon roared, and the sound was so deep and powerful that Laura felt it vibrate through the hull of her ship and through her chest, and into her bones, and the creature launched itself into the air with impossible speed and opened its mouth, and plasma fire poured out, turning 3 of the attacking ships into molten metal that rained down toward the surface. The elf woman moved with grace that no human could match, and her hands wove patterns in the air. And where her fingers traced, glowing symbols appeared, and these symbols expanded into shields of pure energy that protected both her tower and Laura's ship from the weapons fire that was filling the sky. Kate was shouting that they needed to get the ship back into orbit, and she was already firing the thrusters, but Laura could not look away from what was happening above them, and the dragon was tearing through enemy formations. It's like they were paper, and the woman was creating barriers and weapons from nothing but light and thought. And this was a battle between forces that humanity had never imagined existed. More enemy ships poured through the rifts, and Laura counted dozens, then hundreds, and her ship shook as a blast hit their shields. And Kate reported that shields were down to 60%, and Laura knew they had to retreat. But she also knew that if they left this woman and her dragon alone, they would eventually be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The alien woman voice entered Laura mind again, and this time there was urgency and something that might have been fear in the mental message, and she told Laura that if humans valued their species and their homeworld, they would return with warriors and weapons, because the enemy they were witnessing was called the Void Dominion, and they were coming for all worlds in this part of the galaxy and this planet. It was the last line of defense standing between the Dominion and Earth. Laura wanted to know more, and wanted to ask 1,000 questions, but another blast hit their ship, and Kate was screaming that they had to leave now, or they would not survive, and the ship lurched upward, fighting against the turbulence created by the battle. And as they climbed back toward space, Laura kept her eyes locked on the view screen. The elf woman was looking directly at their ship, even though she was miles away, and even though she was in the middle of a massive battle, and Laura felt those violet eyes pierce through the distance and into her soul. And then the woman disappeared in a flash of light, and her dragon dove through a cluster of enemy ships, breathing fire that turned metal into vapor. Horizon Edge broke free of the atmosphere, and Kate immediately plotted a course back to Earth, and Laura sat in her captain chair with her mind racing, and she knew that she had just witnessed something that would change humanity forever, and she had seen magic that was not magic, but technology so advanced it might as well be. And she had met a being who had reached into her mind as easily as breathing. The journey back to Earth would take months, and during that time, Laura would have to figure out how to convince the military and the government that they needed to send their entire fleet to defend an alien world based on a psychic message from a woman with pointed ears who rode a dragon, and it sounded insane even to her, but she had seen the enemy ships. And she had felt the sincerity in that mental voice. And she knew that if they did nothing, Earth would be next as the ship jumped into faster than light travel. Laura closed her eyes, and she could still see those violet eyes watching her, and she could still hear that voice in her mind. And the woman had called her people human, as if she knew exactly what they were, and Laura realized that this alien queen had probably been watching Earth for a long time and waiting to see if humanity would be ready when the war came to their doorstep. Kate came to stand beside Laura's chair, and she asked what they were going to do, and Laura opened her eyes and looked at her trusted friend and second in command, and she said they were going to do the only thing they could do, and they were going to go home and convince everyone that the threat was real, and then they were going to come back with everything humanity had, and they were going to fight. The ship raced through the darkness between stars, carrying news that would terrify some and inspire others, and behind them, the battle continued on a world called 10-447, and a woman with silver hair and violet eyes fought against the darkness with her dragon at her side, and she hoped that the humans would return in time, because she had been fighting this war alone for so long, and she was tired, and she had seen something in that human captain, eyes that gave her hope for the first time in centuries. Laura spent the journey watching the recorded footage of the battle over and over again, and studying every frame and trying to understand the enemy and their tactics. And she watched the dragon move through space as if it were flying through air, and she watched the elf woman create shields and weapons from pure 6 months had passed since Laura returned to Earth, and she had spent every single day of those months fighting a different kind of battle, and this battle was fought in meeting rooms and war councils, and she faced admirals and generals and politicians, who looked at her footage with skepticism and doubt, and some of them thought she had lost her mind, while others thought she was trying to start a panic for no. Reese Admiral Victoria Hayes sat across from Laura in the main war room and behind the Admiral, a huge holographic display showed the footage from X447. Playing on repeat, and the images showed the elf woman standing on her crystal tower, and the dragon breathing fire, and the enemy ships, muck tearing holes in space itself, and yet the Admiral looked unconvinced. The Admiral said that Laura was asking Earth to commit their entire military force to defend an alien world based on nothing more than a psychic message, and the Admiral respected Laura's service record because it was impressive. But this request seemed like madness, and Laura could feel frustration building in her chest, because she had shown them the footage dozens of times, and they still did not understand the danger. Laura stood and walked to the holographic display, and she pointed at the enemy ships and told everyone in the room to look at the weapons these ships were using, and she explained that their scientists had analyzed every frame of the footage, and the technology they were seeing should not exist, and it bent the laws of physics, and it weaponized forces that humanity barely understood, and if these ships reached Earth, there would be no defense that could stop them. Nicole Grant stepped forward to support Laura's argument, and Nicole was humanity, leading expert on alien life, and she had studied the footage more than anyone, and she explained that the elf woman they saw was not just another alien species, but something far more advanced, and her people had technology that humans would call magic, but it was not magic at all, and it was science so advanced that it manipulated the fundamental forces that held the universe together. General Marcus Webb spoke up then, and his eyes had a gleam that Laura did not like, and he said that if this alien woman had such powerful technology, then perhaps humanity should focus on learning that technology and imagine what Earth could do with weapons like that, and imagine humanity becoming the dominant force in the entire galaxy. Laura turned to face the general, and her voice was sharp when she told him that was not why they were going, and they were not going to steal technology or try to dominate anyone, and they were going because if the woman and her dragon fell to the enemy, then Earth would be next in line, and this was about survival, not conquest. The debate went on for hours, and it felt like days, and politicians worried about the cost of sending a fleet so far from home and military. Strategists questioned whether they could even get there in time, and some people suggested that maybe the alien woman problem was not Earth problem, and they should focus on defending their own world and building up their forces at home. But every time someone suggested abandoning the alien world, Laura would replay the footage. She would point at the dragon tearing through enemy formations, and she would remind them that this creature fought on their side, and if beings this powerful were willing to stand with humanity, then they had a real chance at winning. Finally, after endless debates and arguments, it was the footage of the dragon that convinced the council, and they watched it destroy dozens of enemy ships in minutes, and they saw power that could level cities being used to protect a single world. And Admiral Hayes stood and said that if creatures like that were willing to fight beside humans, then perhaps they should take the chance. Laura was given command of the expeditionary force, and it would be the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled, with 12 ships, including their newest and most advanced vessels, and 10,000 soldiers who would train their entire lives for combat, but none of them had ever expected to face an enemy like the Void Dominion. Among the volunteers was a young pilot named Amy Foster, and she had scored at the top of every test for reflexes and spatial awareness, and she approached Laura the night before the fleet was scheduled to depart, and Amy's face showed determination mixed with nervousness. Amy told Laura that she had spent months studying the footage of the dragon and analyzing every movement and every maneuver, and she believed she could predict how the creature would move in battle, and if humans were going to fight alongside such a being, then someone needed to be able to keep up with it and match its flight patterns. Laura saw something of herself in the young woman's eyes, and she recognized the fierce determination and the refusal to back down from impossible challenges. And Laura told Amy that she would fly as Laura wing pilot, and she should prepare herself to keep up with both the captainship and the dragon. The fleet spent 3 months traveling through space at maximum faster than light speed, and during this time, Laura made sure every soldier and pilot was as prepared as possible. And they ran simulations based on the enemy tactics they had observed, and they practiced formations that would allow them to work alongside beings with abilities far beyond human limits. But during the journey, Laura also experienced something she had not told anyone about, and every night when she slept she had dreams, and in these dreams, violet eyes watched her from the darkness, and a voice spoke to her in a language she should not understand. But somehow she did, and the voice was the elf woman, and she was calling too. Laura, across the vast distance between worlds in the dreams, the woman voice said that the void was coming, and the stars were falling, and everything was being consumed by darkness, but in the fire of battle something new could be forged. And Laura did not know if these dreams were real communications or just her mind processing stress, but they felt real. And the connection felt as solid as anything she had ever experienced. The woman in the dreams seemed to be reaching out and searching for Laura, across space and time, and sometimes Laura could feel emotions that were not her own, and she felt loneliness that stretched across centuries, and weariness from fighting a war that never seemed to end, and determination to protect worlds that would never know her name. The fleet drew closer to X447, the dreams became more intense, and Laura could feel urgency and something that might have been hope, and she realized that the alien woman had been waiting for them and counting the days till humanity returned, and Laura felt a connection forming that went deeper than simple alliance, and it was something more personal and more profound when the fleet finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the coordinates 410 to 447. The scene before them was worse than anything Laura had imagined, and the planet was completely surrounded by enemy ships, and there were dozens of the jagged dark vessels bombarding the surface with weapons that left tears in reality itself. Kate worked her controls frantically and reported that the planet's shields were failing and the surface showed signs of massive damage, and Laura felt her heart sink because they might be too late, and the woman might already be dead, and Earth might be next. But then something rose from the planet's surface, and it was wreathed in flames and starlight, and it was the dragon, and on its back, with her silver hair streaming behind her like a comet tail, was the elf woman. And she was still fighting, and she was still alive, and Laura felt relief flood through her entire body. The dragon tore into the enemy ships with renewed fury, and the woman's hands moved in complex patterns, creating explosions of pure energy that destroyed everything they touched. And Laura realized that the alien queen had been holding on and waiting for help to arrive, and now that humanity fleet was here, she was unleashing everything she had been saving. Laura opened all communication channels and broadcast to every ship in her fleet, and she announced that they were the United Earth Fleet, and they had come to honor the alliance. And she ordered all ships to engage the enemy immediately, and her voice was steady and confident, even though inside she felt terror at what they were about to face. The battle began, and human ships joined the dragon in attacking the Void Dominion vessels, and plasma cannons fired in coordination with dragon breath and missile volleys followed energy blasts from the elf woman hands, and for the first time in months, Laura felt hope because they were not too late, and the woman was still fighting, and together they might actually have a chance. Sami Foster proved her worth immediately, and her fighter moved through the battle with precision that seemed almost supernatural, and she was not just avoiding enemy fire, but actively predicting where the dragon would strike next and positioning herself to add human weapons to the creature attacks, and it was like watching a dance between pilot and dragon. In the bridge, Kate coordinated fleet movements while Laura focused on the bigger picture, and she watched the tactical display, showing friendly forces in blue and enemy forces in red, and slowly, very slowly, the blue was pushing back the red, and they were winning. Then Laura saw something on her view screen that made her breath catch, and the elf woman was looking directly at her ship, and those violet eyes locked onto Laura's own eyes across the distance of space and state. Laura felt that mental connection open again, and this time it was stronger and clearer than before. The woman voice filled Laura's mind, and it carried exhaustion and relief and gratitude, and she said that humans had come and humanity had honored the call for help, and she said her name was Lirelei, and she was the last. The battle for the space around X447 lasted 3 days without stopping, and in those 3 days, Laura barely slept and barely ate. And she stayed on the bridge directing fleet movements and watching as humans and dragon fought side by side against an enemy that seemed endless, and every time they destroyed a wave of enemy ships, another wave would appear faster. Became legendary during those first hours of combat, and she flew her fighter with skill that bordered on impossible, and she was not just matching the dragon movements anymore, but anticipating them, and adding her weapon's fire to its attacks in perfect synchronization, and other pilots started following her lead, and soon there was a whole squadron flying in formation with the massive creature. Kate worked her controls without rest, and she monitored every ship in the fleet and called out warnings when enemy fire got too close, and she kept track of ammunition and fuel and shield strength for all 12 vessels. And Laura did not know what she would do without Kate's steady presence and calm voice, even in the chaos of battle. But despite their efforts and despite fighting with everything they had, the enemy kept coming, and Laura could see on the tactical display that the Void Dominion had more ships than she had thought possible, and for every vessel they destroyed, 2 more would take its place. And she began to worry that they could not win through force alone. Then something happened that changed everything. And one of their ships, called the Nightingale, got caught in one of the spatial rifts that the enemy weapons created, and Laura watched in horror as the frigate started to stretch and distort, as if reality itself was pulling it apart, and the crew screams came through the communication channel, and there was nothing Laura could do. But then a shadow passed over her view screen, and it was the dragon, and it dove toward the doomed ship with incredible speed, and Lirelei raised her hands, and light poured from her palms, and it was light so pure and bright that Laura had to look away. And when she looked back, the rift was sealed, and the Nightingale was free and drifting, but intact. However, Laura noticed something that made her chest tighten with worry, and Lirelei slumped forward on the dragon back, and only the creature. Quick movement kept her from falling, and Laura realized that sealing the rift had cost the alien queen a terrible amount of energy, and if she kept doing things like that, she would eventually burn herself out completely. Laura told Kate to open a communication channel to Lirelei, and Kate said that should be impossible because they had no common technology. But then Kate's hands flew over her controls, and she reported that there was something strange happening, and there was a quantum entanglement pattern focused directly on Laura's neural signature, and somehow Lirelei had linked their minds on a level deeper than simple telepathy. Laura told Kate to open the connection fully and to let Lirelei into her consciousness completely. And Kate hesitated because that was dangerous, and no one knew what could happen. But Laura insisted, and suddenly the world around her fell away and vanished. Laura found herself standing in a space that was not really a space, and stars wheeled overhead in patterns she did not recognize, and the floor beneath her feet looked like crystal, but reflected infinity in all directions, and across from her materialized Lirelei, and up close the alien woman was even more beautiful and more exhausted than Laura had realized. Lirelei spoke, and her voice no longer just appeared in Laura's thoughts but sounded real and present, and she said that she was glad the humans had come, and she had not really believed they would return, but they had proven her wrong, and humanity was braver than she had given them credit for. Laura said that they had come because it was the right thing to do, and because Lirelei had asked for help, but she admitted that she did not even know Lirelei's name until a few hours ago, and everything was happening so fast, and she felt like she was fighting a war. She barely understood. The alien queen smiled, and it was a sad smile that carried the weight of centuries. And she said her name was Lirelei, and she was the last queen of the starborn people, and she had been guarding the threshold worlds for 3,000 years, and she was tired. And even with the human fleet help, she did not think they could win this battle. Laura asked why not, and what made this enemy so impossible to defeat, and Lirelei explained that the Void Dominion drew power from consumed worlds, and every civilization they destroyed became fuel for their reality engines, and they had destroyed thousands of worlds already, and with each victory they grew stronger, and cutting them off from their power source would require someone to enter their command ship and destroy the core, and it would be a suicide mission without thinking. Laura said she would do it, and Lirelei looked at her with surprise in those violet eyes, and asked why a human would volunteer to die for a world that was not her own, and for a person she barely knew. Laura stepped closer to the alien queen, and she looked directly into those ancient eyes. She said that she was a soldier, and dying for something greater than herself was part of what she signed up for, but more than that, she could see that Lirelei had been fighting alone for far too long, and no one should have to carry that burden by themselves, and if Laura could help, then she would. Something shifted in Lirelei. Expression and emotions played across her face that Laura could not quite read, and the alien queen reached out slowly. And when her fingers touched Laura's cheek, they were warm despite looking so pale and ethereal, and Lirelei said that humanity was strange and humans lived such brief lives compared to the starborn, but they burned so brightly while they lived. Continued speaking, and said she had fought for 3,000 years and met countless beings from hundreds of species, and none of them had ever looked at her with the kind of pure determination and care that she saw in Laura's eyes, and she did not understand humans, but she wanted the mental space dissolved, and Laura was back on her bridge, and Kate was staring at her with concern and asking if she was all right, and Laura realized only seconds had passed in the real world, even though it felt like she had been talking to Lirelei for much longer, and that was when she understood that their minds were now connected in ways that transcended normal time and space. Laura made an announcement over the fleet communication system, and she said that she needed volunteers for a boarding operation, and their target would be the Void Dominion command vessel, and she would not lie to them because survival odds were minimal, but if they succeeded, they would end this war and save not just X-447, but Earth and every other world in the sector. Response was immediate, and Amy Foster was first to volunteer, and her voice came through crystal clear, saying that she was ready and she would follow Captain Mitchell anywhere. And then dozens of other voices joined in, and Laura felt pride swell in her chest because these were people who understood what was at stake and were willing to give everything. Among the volunteers was Sergeant Maya Collins, and she was a combat veteran who had seen action in the frontier colonies, and she had survived situations that killed everyone around her, and she said that if anyone could pull off an impossible mission, it would be this team. And Dr. Nicole Grant also volunteered, even though she was a scientist and not a soldier, because she insisted her knowledge of alien biology would be crucial as the team prepared their equipment and planned the assault. Lirelei Dragon descended toward the Horizon Edge hangar bay, and Laura thought that was impossible because the creature was far too large to fit, but then she watched as the dragon folded space around itself and compressed its form until it could fit through the bay doors, and up close the dragon was even more magnificent. Scales were not just reflective but contained entire nebulas and galaxies, and Laura could see stars and cosmic dust swirling inside. Each scale and the creature eyes were ancient and intelligent, and when it looked at her, she felt like it was seeing into her soul and judging her worthiness. Lirelei dismounted from the dragon, back with fluid grace that made human movement look clumsy, and in person, without the psychic filters, she was breathtaking, and she stood 7 feet tall, and her armor seemed to be alive and growing from her body rather than being worn, and it pulsed with her heartbeat in shades of silver and blue. She walked directly to Laura, ignoring all the other soldiers who stared at her with awe and fear, and she stopped mere inches away and told Laura that if they were going to do this mission together, they needed to fight as one, and she offered something she had not offered anyone in 1,000 years, and she called it a battle. Laura asked what that meant, and Lirelei explained that their minds would be fully joined, and their strengths would combine, and they would be able to sense each other's thoughts and feelings and fighting styles, and it would make them far more effective in combat, but it also meant opening themselves completely to another person and holding nothing back. Laura did not hesitate, and she said yes immediately, and Lirelei placed her palm against Laura's chest directly over her heart, and energy flowed between them, and Laura gasped as her consciousness expanded outward, and suddenly she could feel Lirelei's thoughts and memories, and she saw battles beyond counting, and worlds saved and lost, and loneliness that stretched across thousands of years. But she also felt something else beneath. All that pain and weariness, and she felt hope and affection, and something that might have been the beginning of love, and she realized that. Lirelei had been alone for so long. The Void Dominion command vessel hung in space like a wound in reality, and it was massive beyond anything humans had built. And it did not reflect light, but seemed to swallow it and consume it, and even looking at it through the view screen made Laura feel sick because there was something fundamentally wrong about its existence. Sammy Foster sat in the pilot seat of the boarding shuttle, and her hands gripped the controls so tightly her knuckles had turned white. And she had volunteered eagerly. But now that they were approaching the enemy ship, she could feel fear crawling up her spine, and yet she pushed it down and focused on flying because the captain was counting on her behind. Amy in the passenger compartment, Laura stood beside Lirelei. And through their battle bond, she could feel the alien queen emotions, and there was determination. There in grim resolve, but also deep sadness, and Lirelei was looking at the command ship and remembering all the souls that had been consumed too. Power Itlarel whispered that she could feel them, and millions of beings had been taken by the Void Dominion and processed and turned into fuel, and the enemy did not just kill but erased everything a person had been and turned their life force into ammunition for the war machines, and it was an abomination beyond anything Laura had imagined. Laura reached out and took Lirelei's hand, and their fingers intertwined, and through the bond she sent comfort and strength and the warmth of human determination. And Lirelei's eyes opened, and she looked at Laura with something close to wonder, as if she could not believe someone would care so much about her. Pain the shuttle shook as it approached the hull, and Amy was using the connection too. The Dragon to navigate spatial distortions that would have torn any normal ship apart, and she flew with precision born of weeks of practice, and the shuttle cut through the outer layers of the enemy vessel, using human plasma torches, combined with starborne energy weapons inside the ship, was worse than the outside, and the corridors branched in ways that hurt too. And the geometry was all wrong, and walls seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process, and some of the walls pulsed with trapped faces, and Laura realized these were the consumed souls, and they were still aware and still. Screaming Sergeant Maya Collins took point and led the combat team with practiced efficiency, and she had fought in dozens of battles. But nothing had prepared her for this, and still she kept her voice calm and steady as she told everyone to stay in formation and watch their corners, and most importantly not to touch the walls. They moved deeper into the vessel and fought past Void Dominion soldiers, and these creatures were made of living darkness, and they had surrendered their physical forms to become weapons, and human bullets passed through them harmlessly. But Lirelei energy weapons found their mark in the blessed ammunition that Dr. Nicole Grant had designed using starborne technology also worked. The deeper they went, the stronger the mental pressure became, and Laura could feel it pushing against her thoughts and trying to fill her mind with despair and hopelessness, and the certainty that they had already failed and nothing they did would matter. But Lirelei was there, and her presence was like a shield of starlight protecting Laura's consciousness. They lost people along the way, and a young soldier named Marcus got too close to a wall, and it grabbed him and pulled him in, and his screams cut off instantly as he was consumed and added to the ship power source. And another soldier named Lisa took a blast meant for Dr. Grant, and her body dissolved into nothing each. Death hit Laura hard, but she kept moving, because stopping meant everyone would die, and she could feel pain too, because the alien queen had seen so much death over 3,000 years, but it never got easier, and each loss still hurt finally. They reached a massive chamber at the heart of the ship, and what Laura saw made her stop in her tracks because it was beautiful in a terrible way. And at the center was a sphere of contained entropy and streams of light that had once been living. Beings fed into it, and the whole thing pulsed like a heart beating, and it was powering the entire void. Dominion war effort around the sphere stood a figure, and it was the Void Lord itself, and looking at it hurt because it was made of concentrated darkness, and staring at it was like staring into the death of the universe. And when it spoke, its voice sounded like stars collapsing and galaxies dying. The Void Lord addressed Lirelei directly, and said that she had prolonged the inevitable, but bringing this pathetic human fleet changed nothing because the Dominion had consumed 10,000 worlds and hers would be next, and Earth would follow soon. After Lirelei raised her hands and energy crackled between her fingers, and she told the Void Lord that not while she drew breath, and not while a single defender remained standing, would she allow it to consume another world. The battle that followed was beyond human comprehension. And Lirelei and the Void Lord clashed with forces that rewrote physics and reality bent around them, and Laura had to look away, because watching directly would have driven her mad, but through the battle bond she could feel what Lirelei was doing, and it was amazing and terrifying. The combat team fought. The lesser creatures and Amy Foster moved with her weapon, firing constantly, and she took a blade that was meant for Dr. Grant, and her blood sprayed across the impossible floor, but she kept fighting, even as she fell, and Maya Collins held the defensive line, even as darkness tried to consume her, and she fired until her weapon ran dry and then used it as a club through it all. Laura felt Lirelei pain and exhaustion and the terrible cost of power that could reshape reality, and the alien queen was dying and burning herself up to match the Void Lord's strength, and she was giving everything she had, and it still might not be enough. Laura could not stand by and watch, and she ran forward past the fighting and past reason, and she threw herself between Lirelei and a blast of pure entropy that would have ended the alien queen life, and the darkness hit Laura like a physical blow, and she felt it trying to unmake her and reduce her to nothing, but Laura held on, and she did not hold on through power, because she had none, and she held on through sheer stubborn human will and the same refusal to give up that had driven her species to the stars and that had made them reach out to unknown aliens and offer help even when it seemed insane. And in that moment, something changed, and the battle bond flared brighter than ever before, and Laura felt Lirelei power flowing through her, but it was different now, and it was amplified by human determination and by the stubborn refusal to quit. That was humanity's greatest strength and weakness combined together. They struck, and they did not strike with darkness or entropy, but with light, and it was starlight and sunlight combined, and it was alien grace and human hope merged into something entirely new and something the universe had never seen before. The Void Lord screamed as it dissolved, and the sound was terrible and triumphant at the same time, and the sphere at the center of the chamber shattered, and energy exploded outward, and the ship began to tear itself apart, and alarms blared, and the structure groaned as reality reasserted itself. Lirelei pulled Laura close, and her arms were strong despite her exhaustion, and she whispered that her dragon would save the others, and it would carry the surviving team members back to the fleet, but for the two of them she could open one portal and send them back to the planet's surface. But it would take everything she had, LaFlora said, to do it, because she was not losing Lirelei now, and not after everything they had been through together. And Lirelei smiled, and it was a smile full of affection and wonder, and she bent reality one last time. Space twisted around them, and in the final moment before the command ship exploded, Laura saw Lirelei's face and saw the violet eyes that had haunted her dreams, and in those eyes she saw something that transcended species and time and logic, and it was love. They materialized on the crystal tower where they had first met, and the ship Death lit up the sky above them like a second sun, and around them the remaining void. Dominion forces were retreating, and their command was broken, and their power source severed, and the war was over. The human fleet cheered, and the dragon roared in triumph. And Lirelei, ancient queen of a dying race, collapsed into Laura's arms, and Laura held her tight and refused to let go, and she knew that something profound had happened between them, and it was more than alliance and more than friendship. It was a bond that would define the rest of their lives. And as Laura looked down at Lirelei's unconscious face, she made a silent promise that she would protect this amazing being who had fought alone for so long, and who had finally found someone to stand beside her. The medical bay on the horizon edge had been transformed into something between human hospital and alien healing chamber, and Dr. Nicole Grant worked without rest, combining human medicine with starborn techniques that Lirelei had taught her before. The final battle, and all around the bay, the survivors from the boarding team recovered from their injuries. Amy Foster would walk again according to the doctors, and the blade wound she had taken was severe, but not fatal, and she lay in her bed demanding to know when she could return to flight duty. And Maya Collins was already back on her feet despite the burns that covered half her body, and she insisted she was fine and ready for the next mission. But Laura's attention was focused entirely on one person, and Lyra lay in the main medical pod, unconscious, and her body was recovering from the immense power she had channeled during the battle and through their battle. Bon Laura could feel her dreaming and processing 3,000 years of war finally coming to an end. For 3 days, Laura barely left Lyra's side, and she sat beside the pod and held the alien queen hand and sent warmth and comfort through their connection. And Kate brought her food and made her eat, and the crew gave them privacy because everyone could see that something profound had formed between the captain and the starborn queen. Then the 4th day, violet eyes opened, and they were clear and bright and focused immediately on Laura face, and Lyra spoke, and her voice was weak but warm, and she said that Laura had stayed beside her. And Laura replied by asking where else she would possibly. Bella Ross said that Laura had saved her, and the human fleet had saved her world, and humanity had given her something she thought was lost forever, and she had hope again, and not just hope for survival, but hope for a future that held more than endless fighting. Laura took Lyra's hand, carefully avoiding all the monitoring equipment, and she said that they had saved each other, and Lyra had protected Earth even though she had never been there, and she had fought alone against impossible odds, and now that the war was over, maybe they could both rest. The alien queen fingers tightened around Laura's hand, and she said that she had lived for 3,000 years and fought countless battles, and never found anyone who truly understood what it meant to carry the burden of protecting others. But Laura understood because she felt the same way, and humans live such short lives, yet they burned so bright. Loa Lorelle pulled Laura closer, using strength she should not have had. Their faces came within inches of each other, and Laura could see her own reflection in those violet eyes, and she could feel breath that smelled like starlight and distant worlds, and something indefinable that was purely Lyralith. Alien Queen whispered that in the core chamber, when Laura had thrown herself in front of that entropic blast, she had felt something she thought she had forgotten, and it was not relief at being saved and not gratitude for the help, but something deeper and more personal, and it was hope for connection and hope for belonging to someone. Laura felt her heart hammering in her chest, and she said that Lyra was a queen, and she belonged to her people, and Lyra shook her head slowly and said that her people were gone and scattered across the stars, and too few to rebuild their civilization. But Laura was here, and humanity was here, and they burned with such intensity and made every moment matter. Laura asked what Lyra wanted, and she thought she knew the answer, but she needed to hear it spoken. And Lyra cupped Laura's face with one elegant hand and said that she was ancient and powerful, and she had stood alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to want something beyond duty. But now she wanted connection and companionship and love, and she wanted to belong to someone who saw her as more than a weapon or a queen or a symbol, and she wanted Lyra drew Laura even closer until there was no space between them, and her lips brushed against Laura's ear as she whispered the words that would change everything between them, and she said that she belonged to Laura. Nothicus that followed was soft at first and tentative, and it was the meeting of two beings who had spent so long fighting that they had almost forgotten how to be gentle, but it deepened and became something profound, and it was a promise sealed between human and starborn, and between two warriors who had found peace in each other's arms. When they finally parted, they were both breathless, and Lyra was smiling, and it was a real smile full of joy and wonder and the simple happiness of connection. And Laura could not stop smiling either, because this amazing being had chosen her. Laura said that the Earth Council would have questions, and humanity's first contact with aliens had resulted in their fleet captain forming a relationship with an alien queen, and the paperwork alone would be legendary. And Lyra laughed, and it was a sound like chiming crystal and pure music. But then Lyra's expression grew serious, and she said that Laura needed to understand what this meant because Lirelei was effectively immortal, and she would watch Laura age and grow old, and eventually die while she remained unchanged, and that pain would be terrible, and did Laura truly want to accept? That Laura silenced her with another kiss, and when she pulled back, she said that humans were experts at making the most of limited time and maybe. She would only have decades while Lirelei had millennia, but she would rather have those decades together. Then centuries. Alana Lirelei eyes filled with tears, and she said that. Laura was remarkable, and Laura corrected her, saying she was just stubborn and there was a difference, and they both laughed and held each other close. Knock on the door interrupted. Them and Kate entered with her expression carefully neutral, and she said that a delegation from Earth had arrived, and they were requesting a full briefing on the battle and the starborn technology and the relationship between the captain and their new alien. Alilara stood and straightened her uniform and told Kate to inform the delegation that she would be there in 10 minutes and to make sure they understood that. Lirelei was not a resource to be exploited, but a person who deserved respect and protection. Kate smiled and said that Admiral Hayes had already made that clear, and apparently watching footage of Lirelei tearing apart enemy ships had convinced the Admiral that the Starborn Queen should be treated as an honored ally after. Kate left, Lirelei sat up, and the medical equipment protested, but she waved away Dr. Grant concerns and said she was healed enough, and if she was going to be part of Laura life, then she should be part of Laura world and meet the people who would shape their shared future. Laura protested that Lirelei did not need to do this immediately, and she could rest longer, but the alien queen stood, and her armor reformed around her body, and the organic metal responding to her will, and her silver hair began to glow with inner light, and despite her recent ordeal, she was magnificently said that she had hidden in the shadows for long enough, and she had protected worlds that never knew her name, and fought battles that no one remembered, but Laura had shown her something different, and belonging to someone did not make you weak, but made you stronger. She took Laura and intertwined their fingers, and said that she would meet the Earth leaders and help forge an alliance between their peoples, but more than that, she would stand beside Laura not as a queen or a weapon, but as someone who loved her. Laura let tears in her eyes, and she said that she loved Lirelei too, and it seemed impossible because they barely knew each other, but through the battle bond she had seen Lirelei's soul, and that was more than most beings shared in 1,000 lifetimes together. They walked toward the war room, and toward the delegation, and toward a future that neither of them had expected, and behind them through the viewport Lirelei dragon circled the ship, standing guard over its mistress and her chosen human. The war was over, and humanity had proven themselves worthy of the stars, and two warriors from different worlds had found something more precious than victory, and they had found each other in the months that followed Earth, and the Starborn formed a formal alliance, and together they built a station that orbited both worlds, connected by quantum gates that Lirelei helped humanity construct, and humans and aliens worked side by side, sharing knowledge and building a future together. Amy Foster recovered fully and began teaching Starborn pilots about human tactics and creating a new generation of warriors who combined the best of both species, and Dr. Grant led a research department studying how human and alien biology could work together. Maya Collins commanded joint security forces and made sure that the peace they had fought for would be protected, and Kate became Laura, second in command of the new combined fleet that would protect both worlds from any future threats. But Laura's favorite moments were the quiet ones when she and Lirelei could simply exist together and watch the stars and not worry about battles or politics or the future, and just be two people who had found each other against impossible odds one evening as they stood in the observation deck watching Earth and X-447 hang in space side by side. Lirelei asked if Laura regretted binding herself to someone who would outlive her by centuries, and Laura kissed her and said that every morning she woke up with Lirelei beside her, she thanked whatever force had brought them together. Lirelei said that Laura had given her something she thought was lost forever, and she had given her a home and a purpose beyond war and love that was fierce and bright and human, and it made